Jake Morrison wiped his sweaty palms on his dark blue uniform for the third time in 5 minutes. The studio lights felt hot against his face, and he could feel drops of sweat rolling down his back. He had trained for this moment for 2 years, but nothing could have prepared him for sitting across from the most feared journalist in the galaxy. The Galactic News Network studio was bigger than any television studio back on Earth. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. Cameras floated in the air around them, moving without making any sound. Jake could see alien faces on screens all around the room, watching and waiting. Zethkar, the questioner, sat across from him, and Jake had to fight not to stare. The alien was tall and thin, with skin that looked like it was made of dark metal. His eyes were bright yellow and never seemed to blink. When he smiled, Jake could see rows of sharp teeth. Everything about Zethkar seemed designed to make people uncomfortable. "Welcome to Truth Seekers, beings of the galaxy," Zethkar said, his voice smooth but cold. "I am your host, Zethkar the Questioner. Today we have a very special guest. This is Jake Morrison, the first human to serve as an ambassador to our Galactic Council." Jake forced himself to smile at the cameras. Back on Earth, he knew that every human was watching. The entire planet had stopped what they were doing to see this interview. Schools had closed early. Offices had set up viewing parties. His parents were probably watching from their living room in Ohio, worried sick about their son. "Thank you for having me, Zethkar," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's an honor to be here and to represent humanity." Zethkar's smile grew wider, showing more of those sharp teeth. "Oh, the honor is all mine, Ambassador Morrison. After all, it's not every day we get to meet someone from such a young species." The way he said young made it sound like an insult. Jake felt his stomach tighten, but he kept smiling. "Humans have been in space for over 400 years now," Jake said. "We've built colonies on Mars, Jupiter's moons, and even some nearby star systems." 400 years, Zethkar repeated, acting impressed. "How wonderful. My own species has been traveling between stars for over 50,000 years. But please, tell our viewers about these amazing human achievements." Jake started to talk about Earth's space program, about the first missions to Mars, about the great ships that carried humans to other worlds. But Zethkar kept interrupting him, asking questions that made everything sound small and unimportant. "And how many star systems do humans control?" Zethkar asked. "Well, we have settlements in 12 systems," Jake said. 12, Zethkar said, nodding slowly. "The Krillian Empire controls over 8,000 systems. The Veltheran Republic has colonies in 15,000 systems. But 12 is a start." Jake felt his face getting red. Every answer he gave seemed to make humans sound weak and backward. He tried to change the subject to human culture, to art and music and literature. But Zethkar was ready for that too. "Yes, human culture is quite interesting," Zethkar said. "Shall we show our viewers some examples?" The air above the table suddenly filled with moving pictures. Jake watched in horror as scenes from Earth's history played out for the entire galaxy to see. There were images of war, of cities burning, of people fighting and killing each other. There were pictures of pollution, of dead forests, of poisoned rivers. "This is your species' history, is it not, Ambassador Morrison?" Zethkar asked. "Thousands of years of warfare. Your people have killed more of your own kind than any other species we know of." That's not the whole story," Jake said, his voice cracking. "Humans have also done amazing things. We've created beautiful art, we've helped each other, we've built great cities." "Oh yes, your cities," Zethkar said. More images appeared. These showed crowded slums, homeless people, sleeping on streets, crime and poverty. Very impressive indeed. Jake wanted to argue, but he didn't know what to say. Everything Zethkar was showing was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. Humans had done terrible things to each other and to their planet. They had fought wars and polluted their world and treated each other badly. "Let's talk about human military power," Zethkar continued. "I understand your species has been quite aggressive in space as well." New images appeared. These showed human soldiers fighting alien pirates, human ships in battle, human weapons firing at enemy targets. But somehow, Zethkar made it all look pathetic and desperate. Your military uses projectile weapons, Zethkar said, sounding amused. Bullets and missiles like something from the Stone Age. Most civilized species gave up such primitive tools thousands of years ago. Human weapons are very effective, Jake said weakly. I'm sure they are, Zethkar said. Against other humans. But tell me, Ambassador, what happens when your primitive weapons face real military technology? What happens when humans fight against species that have been perfecting warfare for tens of thousands of years? Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. He knew the answer, and so did everyone watching. In every encounter between human forces and advanced alien military units, the humans had barely survived. They had won some battles through luck and desperation, but everyone knew they were outmatched. I have here some classified information, Zethkar said, and Jake's blood went cold. Information about human military capabilities that your government tried to keep secret. The alien pulled out a small device and pointed it at the air. New images appeared, showing detailed plans of human warships, lists of weapon capabilities, reports on military weaknesses. Jake recognized some of the documents. They were supposed to be top secret. According to these reports, Zethkar said, the entire human military could be defeated by a single battle group from any major galactic power. Your largest warship has less firepower than a standard patrol vessel from the Andorian fleet. Jake felt like he was going to be sick. Not only was Zethkar humiliating humanity in front of the entire galaxy, but he was giving away military secrets that could get people killed. Perhaps, Zethkar continued, it would be better for everyone if Earth accepted protection from the Galactic Council. We could station peacekeeping forces in your system, help guide your development, make sure you don't hurt yourselves or others. The alien made it sound reasonable, even kind. But Jake knew what he was really saying. He was suggesting that Earth should give up its independence and become a protectorate, like a child that couldn't take care of itself. Jake looked into the cameras, knowing that billions of humans were watching him fail. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but his mind was blank. He had trained for 2 years for this moment, and he was failing completely. The interview was being broadcast to over 200 billion beings across 47 star systems. And all Jake Morrison could do was sit there and watch as humanity's reputation was destroyed on live television. Frank Hayes rolled his wheelchair closer to the large viewing screen in the Luna Colony retirement home. Around him, 24 other old soldiers watched the galactic broadcast with growing anger. The room was quiet except for the sound of breathing, machines, and the occasional curse word from one of the veterans. Frank was 93 years old, but his mind was still sharp as a knife. His body had been broken in too many battles to count. His left leg was gone from the knee down, lost in the Battle of Europa. His right arm didn't work right anymore after taking shrapnel on Titan. But his eyes were still clear and his voice could still make young soldiers jump when he raised it. "This is painful to watch," muttered Pete Collins, a former Navy captain who sat in the chair next to Frank. Pete had lost both his arms fighting space pirates near Saturn 20 years ago. "That boy doesn't know what he's doing." "Kid's trying his best," said Betty Martinez from across the room. She was 87 and had been the first woman to command a human battle cruiser. "But he's out of his league." Frank said nothing. He just watched as Jake Morrison stumbled through another question about human military weakness. The alien journalist was tearing the young man apart, and there was nothing Morrison could do about it. Every answer made humans look weaker, more primitive, more like children who needed adult supervision. "Look at that smug bastard," growled Danny Walsh, pointing at Zethkar on the screen. Danny had been a Marine sergeant and had fought in the First Contact War with the Krillian Raiders, acting like we're nothing but dumb animals. Frank remembered Danny from those days. The man had held a position on Phobos for 3 days against impossible odds, buying time for civilian evacuations. Now he was confined to a wheelchair, his spine shattered by an alien plasma blast, watching some politician destroy everything they had fought for. "He's showing classified intel," Betty said, her voice tight with anger. "That information could get our people killed." Frank's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair harder. He had written some of those classified reports himself back when He was still active duty. The alien had somehow gotten hold of military secrets that were supposed to be locked away in the deepest vaults of Earth Command. On the screen, Zethkar was now talking about putting Earth under galactic protection. Frank had heard that kind of talk before, from bullies who wanted to sound reasonable while they pushed you around. The alien was basically telling the entire galaxy that humans were too weak and stupid to govern themselves. "We should have seen this coming," Pete said. "Should have known they'd try something like this." "Quiet," Frank said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Everyone stopped talking and looked at him. Frank Hayes didn't speak often anymore, but when he did, people listened. Frank had been fighting aliens when most of these men and women were still in diapers. He was the first human to ever kill an alien in space combat, shooting down a pirate fighter with an old-fashioned projectile weapon while everyone said it couldn't be done. He had commanded the defense of New Stalingrad on Mars, holding off an entire alien fleet with just 3 damaged ships and a handful of Marines. But more than that, Frank Hayes was the man who had written the book on human space warfare. Literally. His tactical manual was still used in every military academy in human space. He had studied every alien species, learned their strengths and weaknesses, figured out how humans could fight and win against superior technology. And right now, he was watching 50 years of careful planning go down the drain because of one cocky alien with a big mouth. "This ends now," Frank said quietly. "What are you going to do, Frank?" Betty asked. "We're all too old and broken to fight anymore." Frank turned his wheelchair toward the communication console in the corner of the room. The console was old but still worked, connected to the retirement home's main communication array. As a former colonel, Frank still had access codes that could patch into military networks. Those codes were supposed to have been canceled years ago, but Frank had friends in the right places who made sure they kept working. "Where are you going?" Danny asked, as Frank wheeled himself across the room. "To remind that alien punk who he's dealing with," Frank said. Nurse Katie Brown hurried over from where she had been checking on another patient. Katie was a sweet girl, barely 30, who treated all the old soldiers like they were her grandfathers. "Colonel, Hayes, you shouldn't be using that equipment," she said, her voice worried. "It's against regulations, and you know what the doctor said about your blood pressure." "Katie, honey," Frank said, not turning around. "Go get yourself a cup of coffee. This might take a while." "But Colonel, I really don't think—" Frank turned in his wheelchair and looked at her. It was the same look he had given to enemy commanders across a dozen battlefields. Katie stepped back, suddenly remembering that this sweet old man had once been one of the most dangerous humans alive. "Coffee, Katie," Frank said again, but his voice was gentler now. "Please." Katie nodded and hurried away. The other veterans gathered around Frank's wheelchair as he worked at the console. His fingers might be stiff with age, but they still remembered how to work military communication equipment. "What's the plan, Frank?" Pete asked. "No plan," Frank said, typing in access codes. "Just going to have a conversation with our new friend." "You can't patch into a galactic broadcast," Betty said. "The security must be incredible." Frank smiled for the first time all day. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile he used to give to pirates who thought they could outfight a human. "You kids never understood how this old equipment really works," he said. "These military override codes don't just access our networks. They access any network that carries military traffic, and guess what? The Galactic News Network carries feeds to every military base in known space." His fingers flew over the keyboard, entering codes and passwords that he had memorized decades ago. Warning lights started flashing on the console, but Frank ignored them. Somewhere in the retirement home's computer system, alarms were probably going off, but Frank didn't care about that either. "There," he said as the console beeped softly. "I'm patched into their broadcast network." On the screen, they could see Jake Morrison trying to answer another impossible question about human aggression. The young man looked like he wanted to disappear, and Frank didn't blame him. But this wasn't Morrison's fight anymore. Frank activated the video pickup on the console and checked his appearance in the small mirror. His hair was white and thin, his face was covered with scars, and he was wearing an old military sweater with his service medals pinned to the chest. He looked exactly like what he was, an old soldier who had seen too much war. Broadcasting in 3, 2, 1, the console announced. Frank Hayes took a deep breath and prepared to remind the galaxy why you should never underestimate a human being. The galactic broadcast suddenly split into two images. On one side, Jake Morrison sat in the alien studio looking confused and embarrassed. On the other side, an old human man appeared, sitting in a wheelchair in what looked like a simple room, with white walls. Zethkar stopped talking mid-sentence, his yellow eyes narrowing as he stared at the new image. Across the galaxy, billions of beings suddenly found themselves looking at Frank Hayes. The old man wore a dark green sweater, and his chest was covered with military medals that caught the light. His hair was white and thin, his face was marked, with scars, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "What is this interruption?" Zethkar demanded, his smooth voice showing annoyance for the first time. "Who dares to break into a galactic broadcast without permission?" Frank Hayes looked directly into the camera with those clear, steady eyes. When he spoke, his voice was calm and quiet, but somehow it carried more authority than all of Zethkar's loud words. "Name's Frank Hayes, son," the old man said. "Colonel Frank Hayes, Human Space Marines, retired. And I've been listening to your little show here." Jake Morrison's mouth fell open. Even through his panic and embarrassment, he recognized the name. Every human in space knew about Colonel Frank Hayes. He was a legend, the man who had fought the first space battles, who had written the rules for human warfare among the stars. Zethkar recovered quickly from his surprise. His sharp-toothed smile returned, and he leaned back in his chair like he was getting ready to enjoy himself. "Ah, another human wishes to embarrass himself on galactic television," Zethkar said. "How delightful. Please, old man, tell us what wisdom you have for the galaxy." Frank didn't react to the insult. He just kept looking at Zethkar with those steady eyes like he was studying something interesting but not particularly impressive. "Well, son," Frank said, "I've got a few things to say about what you've been telling folks here. See? You seem to think you know a lot about humans, but you're getting some important facts wrong." "Wrong?" Zethkar laughed, a sound like metal scraping against stone. "I have presented documented evidence of human primitive technology, human military weakness, human violent history. These are facts, old man, not opinions." "Oh, the facts are right enough," Frank said, nodding slowly. "We do use projectile weapons. We haven't been in space as long as other folks. We have fought a lot of wars with each other, but you're missing the important part, son." Frank leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair, and somehow that small movement made him look more dangerous than all of Zethkar's sharp teeth and yellow eyes. "You talk about our violent past like it's something to be ashamed of," Frank continued. "Let me tell you about violence, boy, real violence. Not the kind where you sit in a comfortable studio and insult people who can't fight back." Zethkar tried to interrupt, but Frank just kept talking in that same calm, quiet voice that somehow cut through everything else. "You mentioned human wars. So let me tell you about the siege of New Stalingrad on Mars. 200 human Marines, most of them kids barely out of training, held off 2,000 Krillian raiders for 6 months. 6 months, son. No resupply, no reinforcements, no hope of rescue. The images on the broadcast shifted, showing scenes of the famous battle. Human soldiers in damaged armor, fighting from ruined buildings, holding impossible positions against overwhelming odds. The Krillians had better weapons, better armor, better everything, Frank said. They should have won in a day. But those kids kept fighting. You want to know why? Zethkar's smile was starting to look forced. He tried to speak, but Frank continued without giving him a chance. They kept fighting because that's what humans do. When everything goes wrong, when the odds are impossible, when any sane person would give up, humans dig in and fight harder. Not because we're stupid, son. Because we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten. Frank's voice never got louder, but somehow it seemed to fill the entire galaxy. On countless worlds, beings who had never heard of humans before found themselves listening to every word. "You talk about our primitive weapons," Frank said. "Let me tell you about Captain Sue Ellen Parker. She was flying a cargo ship carrying medical supplies to a colony world. Nothing but medicine and bandages in her hold. 3 Vorthak warships attacked her, thinking she'd be easy prey. The broadcast showed images of a small, ungainly cargo vessel facing off against 3 sleek alien warships. Those Vorthak ships had plasma cannons, missile systems, energy shields. Captain Parker had a cargo hauler with no weapons at all. So, you know what she did? Zethkar didn't answer. His yellow eyes were fixed on Frank's face and his confident smile was completely gone now. She rammed them, Frank said simply. Used her ship like a 2,000-ton bullet. Took out the first warship completely, damaged the second one so bad it had to retreat. The third ship's captain was so impressed, he let her go and sent his own medical supplies to the colony. Frank paused, letting that sink in across the galaxy. That's the thing about humans, son. We don't fight fair. We don't fight honorably. We fight to win, and we use whatever we have to do it. You think our weapons are primitive? Maybe they are, but they work just fine when you know how to use them. Now Frank's voice did get a little harder, like steel wrapped in velvet. You showed classified information about our military capabilities. That was a mistake, boy. See those reports you're so proud of? They're wrong. Oh, not lying exactly, but missing some important details. Zethkar finally found his voice. What are you talking about, old man? Frank smiled, and it was not a nice smile at all. It was the smile of a predator who had been playing with his food and was now ready to eat. I'm talking about the fact that every single alien species that has tested human military forces in real combat has quietly backed down afterward. Every single one. You want to know why? The old colonel leaned back in his wheelchair, looking completely relaxed for the first time since the broadcast began. It's not our technology, though that's getting better every year. It's not our numbers, though we do breed like rabbits. It's because we're the only species in this galaxy that fights harder when we're losing. Frank looked directly at Zethkar through the camera, and his voice became soft and almost gentle. Son, you picked the wrong species to mess with, and you're about to find out why. Frank Hayes sat quietly in his wheelchair for a moment, letting his words sink in across the galaxy. He could see Zethkar's confusion and growing worry on the split screen. The alien journalist was no longer leaning back in his chair looking confident. Instead, he was sitting forward, his yellow eyes darting around like he was looking for an escape route. You're bluffing, old man, Zethkar said, but his voice didn't sound as sure as it had before. Human military forces have been evaluated by every major power in the galaxy. We know exactly what you're capable of. Frank chuckled, a dry sound that somehow managed to be more frightening than any threat. Son, let me tell you a story about evaluation, Frank said. About 20 years ago, the Andorian Empire decided they wanted to test human defenses. They sent a battle group to probe our outer colonies. 3 heavy cruisers, 2 destroyers, and a command ship. Real impressive force. On screens across the galaxy, military leaders and government officials were leaning forward, paying attention to every word. This was information that had never been made public before. The Andorians hit a mining station on Kepler 442b, Frank continued. Little place, maybe 500 people, mostly families. The station had no military value at all. They just wanted to see how humans would respond to an attack on civilians. Frank's voice stayed calm, but his eyes got harder. The mining station sent out a distress call. You know what happened next? A single human patrol ship showed up, the HSS Defender, captained by a young woman named Lisa Chen. One little patrol ship against an entire Andorian battle group. Zethkar tried to look unimpressed, but Frank could see the alien was listening carefully now. Now any reasonable person would expect Captain Chen to call for backup and wait for proper military support, Frank said. But Captain Chen wasn't feeling reasonable that day. See, her little sister lived on that mining station. Frank paused, letting the implications of that sink in. Captain Chen took her little patrol ship, all by herself, and attacked an entire Andorian battle group. Not a probe or a careful engagement. A full attack, guns blazing, no quarter asked or given. The broadcast showed images of the battle, recorded by Andorian sensors. A tiny human ship, no bigger than a yacht, charging straight at 6 massive alien warships. The Andorians thought she was crazy, Frank said. They figured they'd disable her ship, capture her, maybe learn something about human psychology. But Captain Chen had other ideas. Frank's smile got wider and somehow more dangerous. She rammed the command ship, drove her little patrol boat, right through their bridge, killed herself and their entire command staff in one move. But before she died, she transmitted something back to Earth. Not a call for help, not a request for backup. Just 3 words. Frank looked directly into the camera and his voice got very quiet. Remember the miners? Across the galaxy, beings who had never heard of humans before felt a chill run down their spines. There was something about the way the old human said those words that made them sound like a promise of terrible things to come. Within 6 hours, the entire human fleet was moving toward Kepler 442b, Frank continued. Not just military ships, cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining vessels, anything that could carry a weapon or a soldier. Every human ship within 50 light years was heading for that system. Zethkar was staring at Frank now, his sharp teeth no longer showing in a confident smile. The Andorians found themselves facing 400 human ships. Not all of them were warships, but every single one was ready to fight. The Andorian admiral tried to negotiate, tried to explain that it had just been a test, tried to offer compensation for the mining station. Frank shook his head slowly. Humans don't negotiate when you kill our families, son. The Andorian battle group was destroyed completely. Every ship, every crew member. It took about 20 minutes. The old colonel leaned forward in his wheelchair again. But here's the interesting part. After the battle, the Andorian Empire sent diplomats to Earth. They wanted to discuss the incident, to make sure there were no hard feelings, to establish better communication protocols for the future. Frank's voice took on a tone of mock concern. And our diplomats were very understanding, very reasonable. They explained that the attack on the mining station had been a terrible misunderstanding. They assured the Andorians that humans were peaceful people who didn't want any trouble. Zethkar was looking confused now. Then why are you telling me this story? Because, Frank said, 3 months later, every single Andorian military base, within 200 light-years of human space, suffered mysterious equipment failures. Their sensor arrays stopped working. Their communication systems went down. Their weapons had targeting problems. Frank's smile turned into something that would have made a shark nervous. Took them almost a year to figure out that human computer. Viruses had infected their entire military network. Not through any attack or invasion, just through normal diplomatic and trade communications. Our viruses were so well hidden that their own technicians were spreading them without knowing it. The implications of what Frank was saying began to sink in across the galaxy. If humans could do this to the Andorian Empire, one of the most advanced military powers in known space, what could they do to everyone else? The viruses didn't cause any permanent damage, Frank continued. They just made the Andorian military completely dependent on human-supplied replacement parts and software updates. Funny how that worked out. Zethkar's yellow eyes were wide. Now, you're saying humans deliberately infected Andorian systems as revenge? Oh no, son, Frank said, shaking his head. I'm saying humans infected Andorian systems as a warning. The revenge part came later, when 3 Andorian colonies mysteriously lost all their orbital defense platforms during routine maintenance. Maintenance performed by human contractors, of course. Frank looked around at the cameras, addressing not just Zethkar but the entire galactic audience. See, that's what you folks don't understand about humans. We're not just fighters, we're planners, we think ahead. We prepare for problems before they happen, and we never ever forget when someone hurts our people. The old colonel's voice became almost conversational, like he was chatting with old friends. Every species that has tested human resolve has learned the same lesson. We don't fight fair, we don't fight clean, and we don't stop fighting until we win. The Krillians learned it when their entire pirate fleet disappeared in one night. The Forthak learned it when their homeworld's defense grid was turned against their own ships. The Zephyrians learned it when every one of their trade routes started having mysterious accidents. Frank leaned back in his wheelchair, looking completely relaxed. And now, son, you're about to learn it too. Frank Hayes looked directly at Zethkar through the camera, and his expression became almost pitying. Across the galaxy, military commanders and government leaders were frantically calling emergency meetings. The old human's stories had shaken. them, but they were about to learn something that would change everything they thought they knew about humanity. "You've been very proud of those classified documents you showed earlier," Frank said, his voice still calm and conversational. "Information about human military weaknesses, outdated technology, primitive weapons. I have to admit, son, those reports are absolutely accurate." Zethkar blinked his yellow eyes, looking confused. "Then what was the point of all your stories?" "Old man, if the reports are true, then humans are exactly as weak as I said." Frank chuckled again, that dry sound that was somehow more frightening than any roar. "Oh, the reports are true, boy. Every word. Our weapons are primitive. Our technology is outdated. Our military is small and underfunded. There's just one tiny little detail those reports missed." Frank leaned forward in his wheelchair, and his eyes became as hard as diamonds. "We wanted you to think that." The silence that followed Frank's words seemed to stretch across the entire galaxy. On the split screen, Jake Morrison's mouth fell open. In government buildings and military headquarters on 1,000 worlds, beings who had been taking notes suddenly stopped writing. Zethkar stared at Frank for a long moment, his sharp-toothed mouth working soundlessly. When he finally found his voice, it came out as barely a whisper. "What did you say?" "I said we wanted you to think we were weak," Frank repeated patiently, like he was explaining something simple to a slow child. "Every one of those classified reports was written specifically to be stolen. Every piece of information about human military weakness was designed to fall into alien hands. We've been playing dumb for 50 years, son, and you all fell for it completely." Frank gestured to something off camera, and a new image appeared on the broadcast. It showed a human warship, but this one looked nothing like the primitive vessels Zethkar had been mocking earlier. This ship was sleek and deadly, covered with weapons that didn't appear in any of the stolen reports. "This is the HSS Retribution," Frank said casually. "One of our newer models. It was built in a shipyard that doesn't officially exist, using technology that our scientists supposedly haven't invented yet. According to your intelligence reports, humans can't build anything like this." More images appeared. Dozens of ships, all of them advanced beyond anything the galaxy had seen from human forces. Weapons that fired faster than light itself. Armor that could absorb energy attacks and redirect them back at attackers. Engines that could travel between stars in hours instead of days. "How many ships like this do we have?" Frank asked rhetorically. "Well, according to those classified documents you're so proud of, we have none. 0. They don't exist." Frank's smile became genuinely cheerful, like he was sharing a pleasant joke with old friends. "In reality, we have about 3,000 of them, all hidden in secret bases that your intelligence services have never found, all crewed by soldiers who officially died in training accidents or retired from service, all waiting for the day when someone decides that humanity needs to be put in its place." Zethkar was shaking now, his metal-like skin actually trembling. "That's impossible. Our intelligence networks would have detected them. Our spies would have reported them." "Your spies?" Frank laughed, and this time it was a genuinely amused sound. "Son, half your spies have been working for us for decades. The other half have been getting information we wanted them to have. Did you really think humans were too stupid to figure out that you were watching us?" Frank gestured again, and new images appeared on the broadcast. These showed alien agents meeting with human contacts, receiving briefcases full of documents, transmitting information back to their governments. But now the images had additional information overlaid on them, showing how every meeting had been monitored, every document had been prepared in advance, every transmission had been intercepted and analyzed. "Agent Kreshitak of Krillian Intelligence," Frank said, pointing to one of the images. "He thinks he's been spying on human military development for 15 years. Actually, he's been distributing our propaganda for 15 years. Every report he sends back makes his government think humans are weaker than we really are." More images flashed by, showing alien spies from dozens of different species, all of them unknowingly working for human intelligence. "Commander Vorth, of the Andorian Secret Service," Frank continued. "He believes he has access to our highest military secrets. What he actually has access to is a carefully crafted collection of lies designed to make his empire feel safe and superior. Frank looked directly at Zethkar again. And you, son. You think you got those classified documents through your own investigative skills. Actually, they were delivered to you by human agents who wanted to make sure this interview happened exactly the way it has happened. Zethkar's yellow eyes went wide with horror. You're lying. This is all an elaborate bluff. Am I? Frank asked, mildly. He gestured off camera again and a new image appeared. This one showed Zethkar himself, meeting with a figure in a dark coat in what looked like a secret location. The figure was handing over a datapad containing the classified human documents. Your source for those documents, Frank said conversationally. Agent Jennifer Walsh of Human Intelligence. She's been feeding you information for 3 years, building up your confidence, making sure you would eventually try something like this interview. Frank's voice became gentle, almost sympathetic. We needed someone to deliver our message to. The galaxy, son. Someone respected, someone with a big audience, someone who would make sure everyone was paying attention. We chose you. The old colonel leaned back in his wheelchair, looking completely relaxed. See, the thing about humans is that we learn from our mistakes. And our biggest mistake was letting other species think we were harmless. That led to attacks on our colonies, raids on our trade routes, insults to our diplomats. So we decided to fix that problem. Frank gestured to the images of advanced human warships still floating in the air around him. Every species in the galaxy is watching this broadcast right now. Every government, every military leader, every intelligence agency. They're all learning the same thing at the same time. Frank's voice became hard as steel. Humans are not weak. Humans are not primitive. Humans are not harmless. We've been pretending to be all those things because it made you underestimate us. But the pretending stops now. Frank looked directly into the camera, addressing not just Zethkar, but every being watching across the galaxy. The next time someone thinks about attacking human colonies or threatening human lives, they'll remember this conversation. They'll remember that humans don't just fight back. We plan ahead. We prepare. We make sure that anyone who hurts us regrets it for the rest of their very short lives. Frank smiled one more time, and it was the most terrifying expression any being in the galaxy had ever seen. Class dismissed, son. The galactic broadcast went silent for almost 30 seconds. Across the galaxy, 200 billion beings sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just heard. In government buildings on 1,000 worlds, emergency meetings were being called. Military commanders were frantically reviewing their intelligence reports about human capabilities. Trade officials were wondering if their contracts with human colonies needed to be renegotiated. Zethkar sat frozen in his chair, staring at Frank Hayes with an expression of complete shock. The confident alien journalist who had started the interview was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he had just watched his entire world collapse. Frank Hayes looked at the camera one more time, his weathered face calm and satisfied. Well, I think that about covers everything I wanted to say, Frank said, his voice returning to the gentle tone of a grandfather telling bedtime stories. Young Morrison there is a good boy, and he'll make a fine ambassador once he gets some experience. But sometimes you need an old soldier to handle the rough conversations. Frank looked directly at Zethkar, and his expression became almost kind. Nothing personal, son. You were just doing your job. But next time you want to pick on somebody, maybe make sure you know who you're dealing with first. The old colonel reached over and pressed a button on his communication console. The image of him disappeared from the broadcast, leaving only Jake Morrison sitting alone in the alien studio. Jake Morrison blinked several times, trying to make sense of what had just happened. 5 minutes ago, he had been failing miserably at his first major diplomatic assignment. Now he was suddenly the representative of a species that had just revealed itself to be far more dangerous than anyone in the galaxy had imagined. Ambassador Morrison, Zethkar said, his voice shaky and uncertain. Is what that old man said true? Do humans really have secret fleets and advanced weapons? Jake looked at the alien journalist and realized that everything had changed. The balance of power in this interview had shifted completely. Where before he had been a victim being humiliated, Now he was the representative of a species that had just demonstrated it could outthink and outmaneuver the entire galaxy. "I'm sorry, Zethkar," Jake said, and he found that his voice was steady. "No. But that information is classified above my security level. I'm just a diplomat." It was a perfect answer. Jake didn't confirm or deny anything Frank had said, but his calm confidence suggested that everything the old colonel had revealed was absolutely true. Zethkar tried to recover some of his earlier composure. "Surely you can tell our viewers something about human military capabilities. The galaxy has a right to know if there are threats to galactic peace." Jake smiled, and it was a smile that would have made Frank Hayes proud. "The only threat to galactic peace," Jake said quietly, "comes from those who attack peaceful human colonies or threaten human citizens. As long as everyone behaves themselves, they have nothing to worry about." The interview ended shortly after that. Zethkar tried to ask a few more questions, but Jake deflected them all with the skill of someone who had suddenly remembered that he was representing the most dangerous species in the galaxy. When the broadcast finally cut to commercial, Jake sat back in his chair and allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. On Luna Colony, Frank Hayes turned off the communication console and wheeled himself back to where the other veterans were waiting. The recreation room erupted in cheers and applause as the old soldiers celebrated their colonel's victory. "Frank, that was amazing," Betty Martinez said, her eyes bright with tears of pride. "You showed that alien punk what humans are really made of." "Reminded me of the old days," Danny Walsh added, grinning widely. "Back when we were young and stupid enough to pick fights with anyone who looked at us wrong." Frank chuckled and accepted their congratulations, but his mind was already moving on to the next phase. What he had told Zethkar was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The human fleet was indeed larger and more advanced than anyone suspected, but it wasn't quite as large as he had implied. The intelligence network was real but not as comprehensive as he had suggested. The secret weapons were genuine, but not as powerful as he had claimed. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that every alien government in the galaxy now believed that humans were far more dangerous than they had previously thought. Fear and uncertainty would make them cautious. Caution would keep them from attacking human colonies or threatening human citizens. Frank had bought his species time to build the fleets he had claimed already existed, time to develop the weapons he had implied were already deployed, time to turn his bluffs into reality. Nurse Katie came back into the room with a cup of coffee, looking worried. "Colonel Hayes, are you all right?" she asked. "Your blood pressure monitor has been going crazy and there are people from Earth Command trying to reach you." Frank accepted the coffee and took a sip. It was terrible. The way all institutional coffee was terrible, but it tasted like victory. "I'm fine, Katie," he said. "Just had a conversation with an old friend." As if on cue, Frank's personal communication device started beeping. The display showed an incoming message from Earth Command, marked with the highest priority codes. Frank glanced at it and smiled. The message was from Admiral Lisa Chen, the current head of Human Space Forces. It contained only 3 words, but they were the 3 words Frank had been waiting to hear for 20 years. Phase 1, complete. Frank deleted the message and looked around at his fellow veterans. These old soldiers had given everything for humanity, and now they had lived to see their species take its place among the great powers of the galaxy. "What happens now, Frank?" Pete Collins asked. Frank finished his coffee and set the cup aside. Outside the window he could see Earth rising over the lunar horizon, that blue and white world that had spawned a species tough enough to survive anything the galaxy could throw at them. "Now we get back to work," Frank said simply. "We've got fleets to build, weapons to develop, and a galaxy to keep honest." Frank Hayes rolled his wheelchair to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, alien governments were scrambling to reassess the human threat. Trade negotiations were being reconsidered. Military plans were being rewritten. The entire balance of galactic power was shifting, all because one old soldier had decided to have a conversation with an arrogant alien journalist. It had been a good day's work. Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out a small communication device that looked like an ordinary medical alert button. He pressed it once, sending a coded signal that would travel instantly to human agents scattered across the galaxy. The message was simple. They're listening now. Phase 2 could begin.